Hey everybody, welcome to episode 17 of Chord Expansion. Today we are going to be doing a continuation on our discussion of turnarounds. In the previous episode we focused on the two most basic and common turnarounds, the 1-6-2-5 and the 3-6-2-5. But in addition to that, there are a wide variety of different substitutions that can be added on top of that basic turnaround, and we're going to dive into all of that today. So I'm going to do everything in the key of B flat major, and everything that I go over today with an additional 22 turnarounds not covered in this video will be available at patreon.com/MikeAudetteMusic. So I want to start out by talking about the basic turnaround that we did in the previous episode where we took the Freddie Green voicings and we did 1-6-2-5. So if we do that, we have B flat major 7, Freddie Green voicing, then we have G7, then we have C minor 7, and then F7. So where a lot of these substitutions are going to be coming from is by utilizing the tritone substitution. So if you are unfamiliar with what that means, basically every dominant 7 chord that we play has another related dominant 7 chord a tritone away that can be substituted for it. So the easiest way to kind of start visualizing this, if you haven't done this, is take this G7 Freddie Green voicing right here. And all we're going to do is we're going to take the root note, the G note, and we're going to go down a tritone. A tritone is a flatted fifth, if you're unfamiliar with that term. So if we go down a tritone, we go from G down to D flat. And now, rather than playing G7, Freddie Green, we're going to do D flat 7, Freddie Green. Now the thing that's really interesting about these Freddie Green voicings when you do the tritone substitution is we're only really changing one note, because if we look at these 3 notes for G7, it's G, B, F, right? Now all we're doing is taking the G note and switching it to D flat. Now we have D flat, B, and F, or if you prefer to call that C flat if you're, kind of anal about your enharmonics. So G7 and D flat 7 are interchangeable. So I would recommend just getting comfortable going between those two shapes. Right, because this will kind of train you to start seeing the relationship between these dominant 7 chords and the tritone substitutions. Because like I said, they're very closely related, and they pretty much work in most musical settings. You can utilize a tritone substitution whenever you're going to another chord movement. So now if I take that same 1-6-2-5 with the Freddie Green voicings, and I substitute the G7 chord with the D flat 7, right, the tritone sub, now I get this. So just by changing that one note, we get a world of difference, because now we don't have as much movement going on in the bass. The notes are much closer together. So rather than this, now we have this. Right, a completely different sound. So that's one little trick that you can do. Instead of playing the 6 dominant, you can do the flat 3 dominant, because they are very closely related. And similar, you can do it down here. If you see the Freddie Green, the G7 Freddie Green voicing right here, the movement from here to the tritone sub would be this. Once again, just take the G note, move it up a tritone. Right, so just recognizing those two different chord movements in those 2 different positions, getting comfortable maneuvering between those can really add a lot of movement to your chordal playing. So that's the first one. Now, in addition to being able to do that with just Freddie Green voicings, we should also try it with some 4-note chords as well. So I could do this. I could do a B flat major 7. Then I could turn this into a 13, a D flat 13. Then I could do a C minor 7, and then an F7 flat 9. And then back down to B flat major 7. So now I have. And with all of these turnarounds, I would always recommend being able to do voicings on the top 4 strings as well, from the 4th string up to the 1st string, because especially when we're comping in a jazz setting, a lot of times we're going to be using voicings on those strings rather than playing a lot on the 6th and 5th string, because usually the bass is going to be covering that. So we don't always need to worry about that, but there is plenty of context where they can work as well. So I would always recommend getting as many different string groupings as you can of these voicings. So for the 1 chord now, instead of doing the B flat major 7 right here, if I want to do the top 4 strings, I could do like a B flat 6 9. Then for that tritone sub, that D flat 7, I could do like a D flat 9. And I could do a C minor 7, and then then maybe like an F7 flat 9. Right, so. So the three that we just did, we did Freddie Green. Now 4-note chords. And now on the top 4 strings. Okay, now if we want to take that same idea but add an additional substitution on top of it, we can also do the tritone sub of the 5 chord, which is the F7 chord. So if we take those Freddie Green voicings that we were doing, we have the B flat major 7, D flat 7, right, tritone sub of the G, then we have C minor 7. Now right here, instead of doing our F7, remember that movement we were talking about, we switch the F to the B. So now we get a B7 chord. So this gives us a chromatic bass movement all the way down, which is really nice. So now we get this. Right, instead of going, we have. Right. Now if we want to take those same voicings but add an additional note to get 4-note voicings, we could do this: B flat major 7, D flat 13, C minor 7, B 13, Now if we do the same thing but on the top 4 strings, from the D string to the E string, we could start with that B flat 6-9 chord again, then go to our D flat 9, C minor 7, and now we can do the B13 on the top 4 strings. Then we have this. And notice the voice leading now is happening in the top, right? I'm basically taking the same idea that I was doing in the bass note, but doing it on the top note of each chord. So there are so many great ways to experiment with the different voicings within these turnarounds and get some really good voice leading going on within them. Another one, we could do a B flat 6-9, D flat 13, C minor 7, and then a B flat 13 with the 9 on top, right? So we just did. Okay, so those are the first two where we took the 1-6-2-5 progression and we substituted the tritone sub over the 6 chord and the 5 chord. But there is still one other spot where we could still do the tritone sub. So sometimes when people are doing a turnaround, you can also do a tritone sub of the 2 chord. So that may seem a little confusing at first because the 2 chord is minor, and at the beginning of the video I said that you can do this for any dominant 7 chord doing the tritone sub. But a lot of times people will take the 2 chord and actually turn it into a dominant 7 chord. You'll hear guys like Joe Pass do this a lot. So rather than going, they'll go. Right, it has a great sound to it. It almost has like a bluesy sound because when we make the C chord a dominant 7 and go to F7, we get this sound, which is the flatted 5th to the 4, right? So it almost has like a kind of like a B flat bluesy sound, at least to my ears. So if we took the C7 chord, if we assume that the 2 chord is going to be dominant 7 now, the tritone sub of that would be G flat 7. So this is a really great sound, and like I said, this works great over blues as well. So now if we take our Freddie Green voicings, we have the B flat major 7, then we do the D flat 7, right, a tritone sub of the G7, and now rather than going to C7, we could do G flat 7. So we go, and then you just move it down a half step to F7 if you want, right? You can either do G flat 7 to F7 or G flat 7 to B7, depending on what movement you're going for. I really like the G flat 7 to F7, right? I would call that the flat 6 to the 5. So that would give us this. By the way, you could do all of these turnarounds over a blues as well. All you have to do is take the one chord and switch it to dominant 7 rather than major 7. So now if I wanted to do that same idea but with 4-note chords, I could do B flat major 7, that D flat 13 again. Now I could do a G flat 9, and then maybe an F7 flat 9. So that would be, if I wanted to do that same turnaround on the top 4 strings, I can take my B flat 6 9 again and do my D flat 9. Now I'll do the G flat 9 chord on the top 4 strings, and then B 13 with the 9 on top, and then back to the 1 chord. I love that sound. That flat 6 to the flat 2. Or 5. I mean, once again, these tritone subs are so similar that when you look at this chord, you can think of this as either an F7 sharp 9 sharp 5 or a B13 with the 9 on top. So sometimes it gets to a point where they're almost like the same thing. It's just a matter of how you're viewing it, especially when you're doing chords on the top 4 strings, because you don't have that bass note that's really emphasizing whether or not it's the 5 chord or the tritone sub. So, you know, at a certain point, you'll see a lot of these kind of just blend together and just, you know, all work, you know, for the same purpose. Okay, now the last movement that we're going to talk about is referred to as the ladybird turnaround. So some of you may be familiar with this one already. Maybe some of you have heard of it, but are not exactly sure how it works. So a ladybird turnaround is really interesting. So this veers a little bit off from some of the tritone sub stuff that we were talking about. It does have tritone substitutions in it, but it has one specific chord that's distinct to this turnaround that makes it sound really unique. So it's very similar to what we were just doing. We start out with the 1, and then we do the flat 3, which is like the tritone sub of the 6. And then we're going to do the flat 6, but this time we're actually going to do major 7 rather than dominant 7. So this is the one chord that's distinct to the ladybird turnaround. Has a really great sound to it. And then you go to the flat 2 dominant, which is the tritone sub of the 5 chord. So Roman numeral wise, the ladybird turnaround is 1, flat 3 dominant, flat 6 major, flat 2 dominant, and then back. Okay, so if we wanted to do that with 4-note chords, we could do this: B flat major 7, D flat 13, G flat major 9, B 13, and then back to the root. Right? Really great sound. Now if I wanted to do the same turnaround on the top 4 strings, I can take my B flat 6 9, do my D flat 9, and then I'll do a G flat major 7 down here, and then a B 9. So that gives me this. Okay, if I wanted to do another one, I could do B flat 6 9, then I could do a D flat 13 right here, and then a G flat major 9, and then maybe like a B 9, and then land on another B flat 6 9. So that one has some descending voice leading in the top. Right? Okay, so that will give you 4 different ideas to mess around with. You have the 1-6-2-5 with the tritone sub starting on the 6, the 1-6-2-5 with the tritone sub starting on the 5, and then the 1-6-2-5 with the tritone sub happening over the 2 dominant chord, which gives you the flat 6 dominant, and the ladybird turnaround as well. So there's still even more beyond this. I mean, there's really a lot of different possibilities when it comes to turnarounds, but I would say between the 2 that we covered in the previous episode and these 4, this should give you more than enough stuff to experiment with to get some new sounds in your chordal playing, and like I said, as well as your single note playing as well, because you could, you know, think of these different chord substitutions when you're soloing over a turnaround, and it'll give you a whole new palette of sounds to experiment with and to add some new color to your playing. So that is our episode for this week. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. And like I said, if you would like PDFs of all of the turnarounds that I played through on this video, as well as an additional 22 not covered in this video, you can head over to patreon.com/MikeAudetteMusic, or if you would like to just make a donation, you can do so at paypal.me/MikeAudetteMusic. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you at the next episode. Take care.